Hi everyone! I posted a short of this flower landscape style of painting and received a lot of questions about how to create it, so today I'm going to show you how it's done. Here are the materials you'll need. You can find these supplies on my Amazon storefront, which is linked in the description. I've got my water, my drying towel, and my palette. You'll need watercolor paper, 100% cotton, 140-pound cold press. I cut this 4x6-inch piece out of this watercolor paper pad. A flat brush is ideal, but the only one I have is a little too small. It's 5/8 of an inch, so I'm using this 3/4 inch angle brush instead. You'll also need a small round brush. I'm using a size 0, and a brush with a nice sharp point on it, or a liner brush like this one. It's size 2/0. You'll need some tape for your border to hold your painting down. I'm using framing tape, but you can use washi tape or even a gentle painter's tape. I'm going to go over colors soon, but here's a list so you've got it in advance. We're using Quinacridone Gold, Indigo, Prussian Blue, Turquoise, Hooker's Green and Indigo, and White Gouache or White Acrylic, and Gold Metallic Watercolor. Let's take a minute to tape down our paper and then we'll get started. The first step in this painting is to lay down a row of paint, and we want it to be a very dark value of the colors because we're going to add water to them, which will dilute them and lighten them a little. A palette knife is probably the best way to do this, but I don't have one, so I'm actually using the end of one of my paint tubes. You could use any flat surfaced object, a knife, a credit card, a piece of cardstock. There are lots of options. I'm going to use these colors straight out of the tube: Quinacridone Gold, Prussian Blue, Indigo, and Turquoise. I was mindful with the colors because they're going to mix a little, so we want them to go well together. The Quin Gold is a bit of an outlier, but it will just make green if it mixes with these, which is pretty. If I were to add in orange or red instead, it could mix to make some muddy colors. I'm starting with the Indigo and squeezing a dab of it onto the end of my paint tube. If you don't have paints in tubes and only dried in pans, I'm not sure how well this would work. You could add water to the colors to soften them and scoop out some pigment with a small knife or toothpick or something. If you find something that works, please tell us in the comments so others can try. Next, I'm adding a dab of Quinacridone Gold, then Turquoise, and finally Prussian Blue. Now I'm taking my paint tube end that's covered in paint and we're going to press it down in a line across the page down near the bottom. So whether you're using a paint tube or credit card or a note card or a palette knife, you're going to do the same process where you are pressing down the object with paint down onto the paper in a row to get that thick paint applied to the paper. Now that we've got a row of paint laid out, it's time to drag it out with some water. I like to add some sparkle to my water for this. It will give the entire background just a tiny hint of sparkle, so I'm adding some gold metallic directly into my clean water. So every time I rinse my brush off, I'll grab a little sparkle with it, and that will end up on my paper. Now I'm grabbing my angle brush and getting it fully soaked with water. I'm going to keep swishing it around in the water so that I can pick up a lot of the gold sparkle that we just put in there. Now the tricky part is that you actually don't want your brush to be too wet when we drag up the paint, because if we end up with too much water on our paper, it will pool and make puddles and the colors will run together and we won't get the cool color streak effect. So I've dragged my brush against the side of my water dish to pull off any excess water. Now take the edge of your brush and gently push it down into the line of paint that we put on our paper. Continue applying pressure as you slowly drag up to the top of your paper. You can see that there are a lot of dry spots. The paper is not covered evenly and perfectly the first time. That's okay, because we're going to go back and do this over and over again until we have our colors across the whole paper. It's important to clean your brush between every stroke, because we don't want our colors to mix too much and get muddy. So I'm cleaning my brush, being careful not to have too much water on it, and placing it back on the line of paint and dragging up another row and another row. It's important to stay gentle with the pressure that you're applying on your brush, because if you push down too hard, you could squeeze some of the water out of the brush and create some puddles on your paper. And I will tell you that it took me a few times before I got this water-paint ratio figured out. So don't worry if your first try doesn't come out the way you want. Grab another sheet of paper and keep trying. You'll get the hang of it soon, and you'll be so happy with the result. Now that we've got this first layer down, we're going to go over each row again, this time with a much drier brush. So I'm cleaning my brush between every stroke, but I'm also blotting it dry on my towel so that too much water doesn't build up on the paper. We're just trying to even things out and pull up as much of that pigment as possible. You can do some wavy strokes or keep them straight, whatever style you like. Now that I'm satisfied with the top, I'm going to pull some of that leftover pigment down to the bottom. So I'm repeating the same process as before, but I'm bringing my brush down instead. This almost looks like a reflection on water. I love the look of it. Now we're going to let that dry. Alright, my background's all dry now, so I've got my hooker's green mixed with indigo here that I'm going to use for grass and stems. I'm taking my size 2/0 liner brush and getting it good and wet and dipping it in that paint. And I'm going to just paint lots of wispy blades of grass in the background. With a liner brush, I find that it always works best to start down at the base and pull the brush upwards. The darker pigment will be at the bottom and it will start to lighten as you move the brush upwards, and this seems to make the stems or grass that I'm painting look more natural. We want our grass to be all different heights and to be going in all different directions. Have fun with this part and just stick those blades of grass wherever you feel like they belong on your painting. Darker blades of grass in the front just to give the painting some depth. So I'm adding a little bit more indigo to my paint mix to darken it a little bit, and I'm going to add in some more blades of grass. see that the one time that I accidentally started from the top of the blade of grass instead of the bottom, it looks very odd and misplaced, so I blotted it up with a paper towel. After you're done painting your grass, let it dry completely, either naturally or with a heat source. I'm going to use my hairdryer. Now that our grass is dry, it's time to splatter. I'm going to use some white gouache here first, so I'm squeezing some out from the tube onto my palette. I'm loading my brush up with lots of water and then dipping it into the white gouache. I'm tapping the ferrule of my brush onto another paintbrush to get that splatter everywhere. We're going to be splattering a lot, so make sure that there's nothing around your painting that you mind getting splatter on, because this stuff will go everywhere. I'm continuously dipping my brush in more gouache and water to keep the splatter going. You'll need a decent amount of water for this to work. I'm using an old size 6 round brush for the splatter just because I like the size of drops that it makes. You can use any brush that you'd like for this. The smaller the brush is, the tinier the splatter typically is, and the larger the brush is, the larger the splatter droplets usually will be. I'm going to focus most of my splatter on the bottom half of the painting, but I want to be sure that I get some sprinkled up higher on the painting as well. I'm going to speed this part up a little bit because it takes a long time to get this much splatter down, and I think you get the idea. Once we've got enough white on there, it's time to add in some sparkle. If you have some metallic paint, grab some gold, and we're going to do the same exact thing we just did with the white gouache and splatter that gold all over, concentrating it mostly on the lower half of the painting. You could also try some silver here, or more of like a bronze color. I really like the way the gold looks against the blue-green colors that we have in here, so that's why I've chosen it. And of course, if you don't have any metallic paint, you can skip this part and just stick to the white gouache. Or maybe there's another color you'd like to splatter on there, like some blue or quinacridone gold. From this camera angle, the gold splatter is not going to show up very well, but when that light hits it just right, it sparkles so beautifully. Now I've decided that I want some bigger splatter of gold, so I'm grabbing my size 12 round brush and I'm going to do some more gold splatter with this to get those droplets a little bit bigger. After our splatterfest is done, we're going to let it dry completely. Now that our painting is dry, it's time to add in the flowers. You can do this with either white gouache, or I'm using white acrylic here. I wanted to experiment to see if I noticed any difference, but honestly, I can't tell a difference just by looking at it between the white gouache and the acrylic. I suppose the acrylic allows for a little more texture in the petals, but the white gouache gives us a little bit of that as well. So whatever you have on hand, grab it and let's get painting those flowers. I'm using my size 0 round brush for the petals because these flowers are quite tiny, so you'll want to stick to a smaller sized brush. I'm loading up my brush with acrylic paint so that it's nice and thick. I want these flowers to stand out. I don't want them to be transparent or blend in too much with our white gouache splatter. I'm just going to go around the painting and paint lots of flowers with 5 petals, but we want them to all look a little bit different. So on some of them, all 5 petals are going to be the same. On others, some of the petals might be a little bit shorter than some of the others, which will give the illusion that the petal is angled. And other spots, I'll just put 1 petal to make it look like a bud, or 2 petals to make it look like the flower is just starting to bloom. So take some time to place your flowers all over the bottom half of your painting in any places that you feel like they belong. Now here I'm actually going back over the petals once they've dried a little bit with another layer of white acrylic paint just to make them a very bright white. After those flowers have dried completely, it's time to add in the centers for the flowers. I'm using a little bit of Quinacridone gold. My flowers with 5 petals are each going to get a center, but the ones that only have 1 or 2 petals, since they're angled upwards, don't get centers. It's time for the final step, which is the stems. We don't want our flowers to look like they're just floating in space, so I'm grabbing that 2/0 liner brush and dipping it in this darker value of Hooker's Green mixed with Indigo, and just painting thin lines to make sure that every flower is connected to a stem. Now with our blades of grass, we started from the bottom and pulled the brush upwards, but with the stems, I usually go the opposite direction so that the darker part of the stem is up near where the flower is. I imagine that the light is coming from above, so the flower itself causes a shadow on the stems near where they meet the flower. Then the bottom part of the stem is going to just fade and kind of blend in with the grass. The most satisfying part of any painting. It's time to pull off the tape. Now, my tape stuck to my paper a little bit, probably because I used my hairdryer so much and the heat can make the glue and the tape stick a little bit harder, but I was careful as I pulled it off and you can't even tell that any of the paper came off at all. Now your painting is finished. I love to pick mine up and bend it beneath the light to see all of that gorgeous metallic gold sparkling. Thank you for painting with me today. If you enjoyed this tutorial, it would mean so much to me if you would subscribe to my channel. I'll see you in the next one.